Got it! Here's part one of The Neighbor Who Never Blinks, written in the tone and structure you requested. Title/hook: The Neighbor Who Never Blinks. After moving into a new apartment, I noticed that my next-door neighbor spends every night staring through the window without ever blinking. Outline: Part 1. Introduce the apartment, first strange encounters, emotional weight of moving in, and the unsettling sight of the neighbor who never blinks. Part 2. Suspense builds, odd noises, disturbing details about the neighbor, first interactions. Part 3. The mystery deepens, dreams, paranoia, possible supernatural hints, neighbor's strange behavior grows more intense. Part 4. Final revelation, the truth behind the unblinking neighbor, terrifying climax, and haunting resolution. When I first moved into that apartment, I told myself it would be the start of a quieter life. I needed quiet. My previous city life had been suffocating. Sirens at night, constant traffic, and a job that bled every ounce of energy out of me. So when I found this old brick building on the edge of town, something about it felt safe. The rent was cheap, almost suspiciously so, but the landlord brushed it off with a smile. "Most tenants don't last long," he said casually as he handed me the keys. "They say it's the noise, thin walls." I should have paid more attention to that. The apartment itself wasn't bad, a bit dated with creaking floorboards and wallpaper that had yellowed over time, but it had a charm I couldn't deny. From my window, I could see the row of apartments across the narrow courtyard. The building was built in a U shape, so all of us faced each other, like a stage where everyone could watch everyone else's life unfold. At first, I found it comforting, almost communal. Lights flickering on as people came home, silhouettes moving behind curtains, snippets of laughter or arguments carried on the wind. It made me feel less alone. But then, I saw him. The first night, I was unpacking boxes when I noticed movement outside my window. Across the courtyard, directly opposite mine, a figure was standing by their window. Tall, thin, motionless. At first, I thought nothing of it. People look out of windows all the time. Maybe he was smoking or just enjoying the night air. But he wasn't moving, not even shifting his weight, just staring. I tried to ignore it, going back to unwrapping dishes, but every time I glanced up, he was still there. His face was hard to make out under the dim light, but I could tell his eyes were locked on something, on me. I laughed nervously to myself, muttering, "Great, first night and I've already got a creepy neighbor." I pulled the curtains shut, but that uneasy prickle stayed with me all night. The next evening, after a long day of trying to make the apartment feel like mine, I found myself drawn back to the window. It was around 11 p.m., and sure enough, he was there again. Same spot, same posture, just staring. This time, I looked longer. I wanted to see him blink or scratch his arm or shift his feet, anything that would make him seem human. But he didn't move. Not once. My throat went dry. I shut the curtains again. Over the next few nights, it became a routine. No matter what time I looked, if it was dark outside, he was there. Sometimes closer to the glass, sometimes farther back in the shadows, but always watching, always unblinking. I started sleeping with the curtains closed, but that only made things worse. I'd lie awake in bed, imagining him on the other side, staring through the fabric, his eyes burning holes into my apartment. And then it got stranger. One night, after tossing and turning, I gave in and peeked through the tiniest gap in my curtains. He was there, of course, but this time I swear his lips were moving. No sound carried across the courtyard, but the way his mouth formed words, it was deliberate, slow, like he was speaking to me and only me. I stumbled back from the window, heart hammering in my chest. What the hell is wrong with this guy? The next morning, I went to the building's mailroom, hoping to run into anyone who could tell me about him. A middle-aged woman was sorting through envelopes, and I tried to sound casual. "Hey, do you know the guy in 3B, the one right across from me?" Her face went pale instantly. She clutched her mail tighter and shook her head. Don't talk to him. Don't even look." Before I could ask more, she hurried off, leaving me frozen in the hallway with a stack of unopened bills in my hands. That was the first time I felt real fear, not just unease or discomfort. Fear, because it wasn't just me imagining things. Someone else knew, and whatever she knew, it terrified her enough to run. That night, I tried something different. I left my lights off, sat in the dark, and waited. The moonlight spilled faintly into my room, enough to see without being seen. Slowly, I parted the curtain just a crack. He was there. But this time, I swear he was smiling. And I swear to God, he raised his hand and waved. I shut the curtains so fast the rod nearly came down with them. My whole body was shaking. I pressed my back to the wall, breath ragged, trying to convince myself it was nothing, just some weird neighbor messing with me. But deep down, I knew. Something was terribly wrong with the man across the courtyard, and I had no idea how much worse it was going to get. Part 2. After that night when he waved, nothing felt safe anymore. The apartment that had once promised quiet and a pause from the city's chaos began to feel like a fragile paper shell around me, thin, flammable, easily torn. Small sounds became enormous. The whisper of heating pipes, the scuff of a neighbor's shoe, the distant murmur of a late-night TV. Each noise made me sit up, listen, convinced for a moment that the man across the way had finally found a new trick. The first week after the wave, I tried to act normal. I left the building for errands during the day, bought groceries, ran into the woman from the mailroom once more and gave her a tight, hopeful smile. She didn't meet my eyes. She hurried away with her hands full of flyers, as if the sight of me might infect her. I told myself, repeatedly, that it was better to treat it like a neighbor problem. People have quirks. People do odd things. Maybe he'd lost a loved one or had an illness. Soldiers of unbearable grief sometimes stood motionless at windows I'd read in articles about loneliness. Empathy was easier than fear. But empathy didn't keep me from peeking through the curtains at night, and it didn't prevent sleep from turning into a series of startles and shallow, fragmented dreams. Then there were the nights when he was not at the window. Those nights felt somehow worse, as if his absence meant he was somewhere else doing something that would reach me eventually. Once I counted the minutes, 60, 90, a full 2 hours, before he reappeared. When he did, he wasn't alone. A woman stood behind him, pale in the moonlight, her head tilted at an impossible angle. She didn't move. He leaned in toward her, lips close to her ear and mouth words I couldn't hear. He seemed pleased. That detail, an expression that could be read like a map of calm delight, made bile rise in my throat. I backed away from the window and vomited into an old cereal bowl. I told myself it was because of the cheap takeout I had eaten earlier, but the images of that motionless woman haunted the edges of my vision for days. I found myself replaying insignificant things, how the neighbor's curtains never truly closed, how the fire escape ladder outside his window was rusted and unused, how the light in his apartment never flicked on properly, but remained a flat, steady glow. Little facts that added up like stitches in a wound. One night, in a fit of stubbornness, I left a light on in the living room and placed a single cheap candle on the sill facing his window. It felt petty and childish, like something you do to prove to a bully that you aren't afraid. I sat on the couch and watched the flame tremble, felt the ridiculous urge to see if he would mimic me, light a candle of his own,
smile, wave. For a while, nothing happened. The courtyard remained a black rectangle, the other apartments like dark teeth. Then, slowly, the silhouette appeared. He stood longer that night than usual, hands in his pockets, head slightly bowed. For the first time since I'd moved in, he left the window. The silhouette retreated into a shadow, and I sat frozen, leaning toward the glass like a plant toward the light. Minutes passed. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but who would I call? The landlord? He'd only chuckle and tell me the building had its quirks. The police? A neighbor is staring at me sounded ludicrous when typed into a phone. I felt childish and hysterical in the worst possible way. When he returned, he was holding something. A small, white box. He placed it on his sill, directly opposite my candle, and opened it. Inside, like something from a child's macabre ritual, were 2 pairs of film negatives and a single Polaroid. He lifted the Polaroid and turned it slowly, as if letting me see the image without me actually seeing it. A grainy, overexposed photo of a woman, eyes closed, mouth slack.